All right, welcome college baseball fans. I'm Monty Taylor. This is Jake McKeever, the jester of college baseball takes. We are continuing our ACC deep dive series with Louisville and Clemson today. If you haven't had an opportunity, we've already done 6 teams. Those 6 teams are Notre Dame, Pitt, Boston College, let's see, Boston College, Georgia Tech, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. So those are all already on there on our YouTube page, so you can go and see those when you get a chance. If not, we'll get to your team in the next couple weeks. Jake, how are you doing?
I'm excited, man. There's two teams that kind of went in complete opposite directions last year, but I think have very similar talents. So excited to kind of go in, deep dive, see kind of what each team has, and see if we see 2022 Louisville or 2022 Clemson more.
Now, Jake, we are doing Clemson tonight, and as everyone, they may not be aware, you are already hated by half the state of South Carolina after your power rankings for the SEC and your top 25 rankings putting South Carolina towards the bottom. I ran a poll earlier today to see if you were going to unite the state of South Carolina in their hatred against you by saying something bad about Clemson. And 50% of the people voted and said, yes, you are going to be South Carolina, the state of South Carolina, public enemy number one. So you've got a target on your back in South Carolina, buddy.
Luckily, ECU and Campbell are both in North Carolina because I think I pissed off a lot of that fan base too as well. So maybe I just won't go to the Carolinas anytime soon. Maybe.
Well, while we're at it, we can take shots at the Citadel and College of Charleston while we're out there. While we're discussing
South Carolina State. I think they cut their baseball program, didn't they?
I am not sure. I will not pretend to even try and guess at that and pretend I know about South Carolina State baseball.
No High Point though, so I can take shots at High Point.
They're in North Carolina.
Yeah, right.
So you're good. No, so we're going to start with Louisville. Louisville last year, both, again, as Jake said, both these teams kind of went in opposite directions. And coincidentally, both those kind of changes came after they faced Wake Forest. So Louisville was 26-9 and 8-7 the ACC, a top 20 team. They looked like a lock for the tournament. Jake, I believe you thought they were a top 5 team in the country, I believe.
Yes, and I went and saw them in that college classic where they banged the ball all over the yard. I mean, Christian Knapczyk made it look really easy, gliding into second just about every time. The pitching was phenomenal, and that seemed to be the high point of the season. And then they rolled to you, Monty, about a month and a half later, and it was just a completely different team.
By the time I saw them towards the end of April, the penultimate ACC regular season series with Virginia, again, April 16th, they're 26-9. After losing a tough series to Wake Forest, they won 1 of 3. But after that point, they go 5-15 overall and 2-13 in the ACC. They were swept by Duke, Clemson, Virginia, and they missed qualifying for the ACC tournament. And remember, 12 of 14 ACC teams get in. Louisville goes from what looked like a tournament lock, NCAA tournament lock, to ACC not even making it to Durham, which is stunning. A stunning collapse from a very talented team. And yeah, they had a couple injuries, but not major injuries across the board. They just kind of, it looked to me at the UVA series like it was a team that was just trying so hard to fix itself that the harder they tried, the more it unraveled.
Yeah, and I feel like that's kind of a good explanation for them. They had a ton of talent up and down this lineup. As we kind of jump into that, Jack Payton hit over 374. He missed almost a little bit of time there in the middle that you almost forget he did. I believe Christian Knapczyk got benched for a little bit because he played 45 games. I want to say, like, I remember him getting benched, hit 331. And, if you look at this was
those are your 2 best hitters.
Yeah. And they were a super regional team the year before. And, they really, I know A&M swept them in 2 games, but they really took them to the wire both games. And Jack Payton, I was very, very high on him last year, too, coming into the season. I felt like he had a chance to be an ACC player of the year, and he really did hit like it, but it just ultimately didn't translate to any kind of success for Louisville. I mean, they lost a few pitchers, too, as well. But a lot of the core of this team, I think, returns. So it is kind of exciting to see as they return a ton of talent, but it's talent that kind of disappointed last season.
Yeah, and keep in mind they do lose their 2 best hitters, but after that, everyone else seems to be coming back. They lose a couple of arms, a trio of arms, but they've bolstered that, and we'll get into that here in a second. But Jack Payton's obviously the big loss, but there's a lot to like, and it's interesting. I thought there was a period of time where Dan McDonnell, who has been at Louisville and has built this program, I thought there was a point last year towards the end of the year where he was thinking about possibly going to the Alabama job. And there was even an interview in the last game of the season where he was pretty candid about being let down by the administration, and he wanted to be around an administration that wanted to win, and it wasn't just about saying the right things, but doing the right things to back up those statements. But luckily, Louisville retains their program coach in Dan McDonnell for a 19th season. So he is coming back, and I'm sure they learned a lot through the adversity last year. Like you said, they did go 3-0 at the Shriners College Classic in Houston, which you saw with big wins over Texas A&M, TCU, and Michigan. So, the success was there at the beginning of the season, and then baseball is such a mental game. Things went downhill from there.
Yeah, and like to kind of touch on the stuff with Coach Dan McDonnell, he ended up staying, and I think that they retained a ton of talent too, where it could have really unraveled. I mean, there's a lot of guys here that could start at a majority of Power 5 programs, and I think that's kind of a testament that Louisville kind of did buy in with him, that a lot of these guys stayed, as well as, they have a pretty good recruiting class coming in. I know there might not be a lot of immediate starters, but I think it's truly an underrated recruiting class.
Yeah, and excuse my dog in the background. He is probably hearing nothing. Whispers, I have a corgi, and they bark at the wind. So if you hear a dog barking in the background, I apologize. We're going to move on to looking at the projected lineup. Let me bring up our graphic here. So that you guys can see. There we go. Trying to. All right. All right. There we go. All right. It was taking a hot second. So we have Louisville, and one of the big places, like we said, they are only losing 2 big position players. But if you look at it, the Jack Payton was your catcher, and they did have some issues last season with when Jack Payton had a little bit of the injury. Like as you saw, he only got to play in 48 games because there was a stretch where he missed about 8 to 10 games of their season, and they had some issues at the backstop. Where at one point Ryan McCoy, who's the first baseman, had to play catcher for them. So injuries weren't a major issue for the Cardinals outside of Jack Payton, but you did have issues with the catching position for a period of a couple of weeks where Ryan McCoy, who is not a collegiate catcher, was playing catcher. So the big name here, they brought in Luke Napleton, Division II player from Quincy. He, again, you're going to see some bloated stats when we bring in some D2 and D3 guys, but it's still rather impressive when they do this. And I'm going to tell you the number that's going to be really wild here. He played in 58 games for Quincy last year, hit .352, 18 doubles, a triple, and 29 home runs. In fact, he's hit 49 home runs over the last 2 seasons at Quincy. So this is somebody with major pop. I don't care what division of college baseball you play in. 29 home runs in a season is absolutely ridiculous. And you're not going to be able to do that without having a lot of pop.
Yeah, this one, it was kind of surprising just as the amount of, runs that Louisville catchers have been on. I know Henry Davis went 1 overall. Dalton Rushing was another big bat as he's kind of flying through that Dodger system. And then Jack Payton last year, that you almost kind of felt like they didn't have anybody to carry the torch, and that Luke Napleton came in. I think is an impressive get based on what they've had in the past. But again, I think the two names to watch out for are George Baker and Taggart Tyson. Taggart Tyson, I think, was a very, very highly recruited catcher and was a really big get for Louisville. So I think he's kind of going to be that next line. Obviously, I mean, it's very big expectations to have the last three guys go in the first round. But I think Taggart Tyson's going to be the guy that kind of carries on this legacy.
Now you'll notice that there is a big freshman catcher that's not listed here right now, and that's Zion Rose, who a lot of people are high on, but he's so athletic. I have him projected to be playing in the outfield as a freshman, so I did not put him down here in the catcher position, even though that might be where he ends up. So we'll talk about him a little bit later, but if any Louisville fans are watching and are wondering why Zion Rose is not listed in the catching position, that's why. I think he's going to see a lot more time because of the versatility of his bat and his athleticism in the outfield at first. He may eventually transition down the line to catcher, but right now I don't think he's going to be playing much catcher as a freshman.
Yeah, and Luke Napleton, he brings a very professional approach behind the plate. He can kind of manage the staff, which for as much as Jack Payton and Dalton Rushing are now on to next things, that really was kind of a weak point for them, was their ability to kind of manage these staffs. And I think Luke Napleton's going to be somebody that kind of carries that load and provides these pitchers kind of, the stuff behind the game from a catching standpoint.
Well, and this is our 7th ACC team of the previews. And I hope you guys have started to notice a trend that there is a lot of D2, D3 catching talent that's coming to the ACC this year. And the catching position is so important with experience. It's going to be there's a reason for that, why you're bringing in so much experience with the catching position from the lower levels of collegiate baseball. And these guys are going to have huge impacts. And Napleton might be the best of the group in the ACC of guys coming from lower divisions.
Yeah, I mean, those 29 home runs really do kind of jump out at you. And when you look at his swing, too, he has a very fluid swing. I know it's very tough to find Quincy baseball highlights, but I dug deep and found a few. And he has a really kind of fluid swing that you almost don't realize he has the kind of pop to, have 30 home runs in a season.
Yeah, and you mentioned the two freshmen in George Baker and Taggart Tyson. They have a lot more upside than Klein and Vierling. Vierling got some time last year. Didn't have a great showing. He hit under 200, so he's probably a defensive first kind of guy. And the graphics shows him as a junior. I believe he is a sophomore, so I believe both Matt Klein and Will Verling are sophomores, but
I guess we'll never know until Louisville updates the roster. It's kind of like a great missing link trying to piece everything together.
Yep, we are about 24, 25 days, something like that, from opening day of college baseball, and Louisville has not updated their 2024 roster. So I'm sure they're busy over there and just haven't gotten to it. But that's the catching position. It's looking pretty good, but Napleton is really going to be an underrated transfer get for Louisville. Moving along to the infield, they are bringing back 3 mainstays from last season. Ryan McCoy, Gavin Keelan, and Logan Beard, they all started. I mean, Logan Beard and Ryan McCoy started 55 games for Louisville last year. Gavin Keelan, he started 46. So you bring back a really experienced infield. And Gavin Keelan was a big-time freshman last year. He's coming forward. Expect him to make a big step forward in his sophomore season. Not a lot of no home runs, but he did hit 9 doubles, and he's going to be a top of the order bat, but I expect to see a little bit more from him. He only hit 265. I think he's going to take a huge step forward offensively for Louisville this season after all the experience he got as a freshman.
And I forget who he kind of took over for, who really struggled kind of when Louisville was coming in that stretch and he was thrust in. He really does kind of provide a glove up the middle, which I think was something that Louisville kind of lacked with Napchik, and his name is kind of slipping my mind. But I think that's kind of the underrated aspect about Keelan is his glove and his ability to play the field. But again, as you kind of look at these corners, Ryan McCoy and Logan Beard are two names that really, really jump out at you. Ryan McCoy, I mean, he hit 12 home runs, 44 RBIs. Logan Beard, 282, 7 home runs. So these aren't kind of eye-jumping stats, But again, I think that these are two guys that I think we see take kind of that last step as they go on this last ride and raise their draft stock a little bit.
Yeah, and Ryan McCoy, he transferred in from I think a JUCO school for his first and it was his first year in the ACC last year, excuse me. And then this year it's going to be I think another step forward for him as well, because it's like he was a freshman. I don't necessarily want to say that with a JUCO transfer, but in terms of a first-year ACC player, now he's got a whole year of that under experience. And again, that adversity they went through last year where they went 5-15 down the stretch, those actually can be very helpful for a good team. You don't want those things to happen, but it can really bolster your lineup. The other name, Brandon Anderson, I have him as a freshman. That is incorrect. It should be a junior. He's come back. I expect him to be in the DH role. He had some good numbers last year. Again, the power not quite there, but he did hit 295. And
I think Patrick Forbes, I kind of hinted at it earlier when Christoph Natchik was going through a few of those issues. He started a ton of games at second base for Louisville, especially down the stretch when they were doing almost like those hockey line changes late in games to try and get meaningful at-bats. He had the kind of ability to go in and get some of those big at-bats. 258, again, isn't an average that kind of jumps out at you, but he's going to be another guy on those stud sophomores that kind of takes another step forward. He has kind of an underrated bat, doesn't strike out a ton. I think he's kind of another one that you can kind of see in that second base DH kind of platoon as Louisville. Because that's the thing about Louisville is they don't really have a lot of power. They don't really have that standout DH. I think that they do kind of, match up some of the puzzle pieces here early.
Yeah, and Dylan Hoy is a pretty underrated get as well. We talked about Napleton, but Hoy, he's going to steal a lot of bases. He's going to put pressure on opposing catchers. I really like that. They're going to run a bit.
Yeah, and I think that they almost have to. I mean, we'll kind of touch on it a little bit later as they have a few guys in the outfield that can really fly. When you don't have kind of the banging around the ball as only one player other than Napleton hit double-digit home runs, and that was Brian McCoy who hit 12, that they are going to have to manufacture a ton of runs. And I think that this is kind of, a McDonald kind of team that he's built, kind of going back to those Louisville teams of old, is they're kind of getting back to the basics, it almost seems like, with this team.
Well, it's funny. I haven't seen much about Alex Alicia, who's going to be the backup shortstop. I was reading a bit on D1, and I can't remember who wrote the article. Apologies to whoever at D1 wrote the article on Louisville. But they said that the comparison to Napchik is almost too convenient. That he's going to be their shortstop of the future, and it was a lot like Napchik. So that shows he's fairly talented. Napchik, for all his issues last year in certain areas, he was a very, very good college baseball player. There's a reason he's not coming back as a senior. It's because he was drafted. So you got to like the depth here with Patrick Forbes, Alex Alicia, and Brandon Anderson in backup positions, even though Brandon Anderson will likely be the DH. You got to like that they've got some talent here. And Tucker Biven, who's primarily going to probably be used as a pitcher, is provide some more infield depth. And Patrick Forbes, by the way, we didn't mention it. We were talking about him, but he also is going to be an important piece on the mound as well. He's going to get a lot of at-bats. He's going to get a lot of innings. He's a true two-way player.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to like about this Louisville. I don't think they have a ton of star power as they've had in years past. But again, like I kind of mentioned, they're kind of getting back to the basics. It's going to be more doubles and less home runs. I think there's going to be less errors this year from this Louisville infield as well. I know that was kind of an issue with Christian Napchik last year and the year before as well.
Yep, and now we're moving into the outfield. And again, they are returning all three outfield players in Isaac Humphrey, Eddie King Jr., and JT Benson. I have Lucas Moore listed as a right fielder, but he's more of a true center fielder. But talking about these three starters, you're bringing back a lot of experience, two seniors, and then Eddie King, who finally got a chance as a sophomore last year. And Eddie King had a hot start. You have to wonder with the way he started the season if Louisville really kind of rode Eddie King, and then when he came back a little bit to earth, that's when the team kind of fell apart.
Yeah, I remember mentioning that kind of in middle March, early April, is that Eddie King almost felt like the catalyst of this team. And I think he's going to have to be that again, as they're going to lean on him a ton to be kind of that veteran in center field, as well as his bat. Like you said, I think his average was up to like 330, 340. And again, it kind of returned back to earth, and that's kind of when Louisville started to struggle. But I think if he can kind of figure out the bat, right, and be kind of the player that he was at the early part of the year, I think that this is kind of one of the better outfields in the ACC, especially with Isaac Humphries and JT Benson as the 2-3.
Yeah, I think Benson's an underrated player. I mean, 49 games last year. He was a solid bat with some pop, 10 doubles, 3 triples, 6 home runs. But then again, we talked about it with Dylan Hoy, and Eddie King does it as well, but the stolen base is going to be a big part of Louisville's offense. He was 16 of 20 in stolen bases last year, a big piece. And he's coming back. Again, ton of experience in those corner outfield positions. You got to like that. I think JT Benson's a really underrated player for Louisville.
Yeah, and speed really doesn't slump either. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can kind of get fast guys and get chaos going, as OU kind of rode that a few years back. But, Isaac Humphrey, I think, is a name that you want to gravitate towards. He's been at Louisville a few years. He's kind of been around. His average took a dip last year, but I think he has kind of a chance to have kind of a senior moment, whether that be, I think he's going to be right in the mix in some big-time moments in Louisville baseball this year.
Yeah, and now we talk about some of the backups here. Zion Rose, I mentioned earlier, he's a catcher by trade out of high school, but I really like him in the outfield. I think he's a top 50 recruit, and he's going to push for some playing time in the outfield. I don't think we're going to see him at catcher this season, as I said earlier, but he is a good-looking freshman. He's my impact freshman on the offensive side for Louisville. It's going to be tough for him to get at bats with Humphrey, King, Benson in front of him. But if there's any chance for the DH or any of those guys slump, or God forbid there's any injuries, he's going to be right there to make sure the team doesn't miss a beat.
I think Lucas Moore is kind of another freshman to watch out of this. I'm not sure the amount of playing time that he's going to get behind Benson, but he was another kind of big recruit for Louisville. I think he's kind of another name to watch here as he kind of grows into his body a little bit more.
Yeah, you got to like the freshman class. They're a top 25 recruiting class. There is a lot to like about these freshmen. And we may not see a lot of them this year, but down the road, we're going to see them, whether they're starting as sophomores or they end up somewhere else because they don't play enough at Louisville. We're going to see some of these guys. I don't expect that to happen too often. So I really like this team. Swiderski, even him as a freshman, he's got a big-time bat, potential to be a big-time bat for Louisville down the line. I don't think he's going to see many chances as a freshman, but you never know. Somebody like, we'll talk about him later, but Cam Canarello wasn't really on too many people's radars last season to make an instant impact as a freshman, and now he's projected to be the number 1 overall pick in next year's draft after a sensational freshman year. So you never really know where the freshmen are going to take advantage of opportunities and make themselves a household name.
Bonnie, you might know the answer to this because I certainly don't, based off their roster not being posted. Is there any relation between Isaac and Max Humphrey?
I do not know. I was hoping to find that out. I am not sure.
I guess we'll have to wait for the bio to come out.
Yeah, if any Louisville fans are watching and if they know the answer to that, please throw it in the comments. We'd love to know because, I don't want to take shots at Louisville for not having their website up to date, but I'd love to know if Isaac Humphrey is related to the freshman Max Humphrey in left field.
Because, brothers get Monty really excited. UVA, I mean, they almost trademarked the recruiting the brother of a stud guy.
Yeah, I get really excited. I love the brothers storylines. So anytime there's brothers, especially when they go to the same school, that's my favorite. It's a little bit more sad when they go to different schools. But then you get the nice, fun sibling rivalry if they go in conference. So please let us know in the comments if Isaac Humphrey and Max Humphrey are related or not. And if they're not, I'm also going to be sad.
Moving on kind of to the pitching staff, which I think is one of the strengths of this Louisville team. I mean, when you look up and down it, Carson Leggett is obviously the big name to watch. Sebastian Gongora, I think, is another name that we're going to kind of highlight on, is the Wright State transfer. They really do kind of have, I think, one of the best 1-2 punches in the ACC, Monty.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are underestimating Louisville because of what happened last season and assuming that they lost a bunch of talent from that team. But like we talked about at the beginning of the show, they lost 5 key players, only 2 of them offensively, and only 3 of them on the pitching side. And then they bring in Sebastian Gongora, who Wright State was a tournament team, and he was, I believe, their ace, their Friday night guy, and he went 10-1, 3.25 ERA, 81 strikeouts, and 88.2 innings, and that's a huge get. And we talked about it. We were on a podcast on Monday for the ACC for fifth quarter. They called Around the Diamond, their baseball show, and Micah mentioned that Carson Liggett and it has a chance to be the ACC Pitcher of the Year, and I actually agree with him. When we were doing our ACC preview show in December, I forgot about Carson Liggett. My apologies, because I saw him pitch against Virginia, and he was absolutely lights out. And it took some defensive miscues for UVA to win that baseball game, which is kind of how Louisville's season went last year. But he was fantastic, and he should be the ace of the staff. They might go Gongora just because of his Friday night experience, but Liggett, 7-2, 3.42 ERA. Pretty darn good in ACC play. I really like the 1-2 punch that you mentioned. This is an underrated one. I think a lot of people are overlooking him.
Yeah, I think Carson Leggett, too, at the beginning of the year, he kind of struggled with command a little bit, and that was something that as ACC kind of rolled on, that kind of stopped becoming a talking point, as that was kind of his biggest Achilles heel, at least in Houston. But I think that there is a ton to like about this, and as we've kind of seen with the team so far, pitching is going to be at a premium this year in the ACC outside of, obviously the big one that wears black and gold down in Winston-Salem. So I think that this is one of the more underrated pitching staffs, and I think it's a plus for Louisville.
Yeah, and the third guy who I project to be the starter is going to be the Sunday starter is Jake Caraba. He's another D2 transfer, and again, we say to take these stats with a grain of salt, but there is a trend where the stats obviously aren't duplicated at a higher level, but they do find success there at a normal pace. Jake Caraba went 7-2 in 11 starts last year with a 1.62 ERA. And are you ready for this stat? 119 strikeouts in 66 2/3 innings, only 20 walks, almost 100 more strikeouts than walks. This guy, I'm glad he made the move. He's making the move to Division I because that is absurd.
Yeah, and we always kind of do it with an asterisk with the keep D2 stats, but again, along with 29 home runs and that many strikeouts, it's just insane. Like, that's something that's definitely going to translate into the next step of college baseball. And I'm really excited to talk about this bullpen, Monty. I'm kind of chomping at the bit. I know we're trying to get ahead of ourselves here, but that's really where I think that this team kind of excels, as there's a few names that I do want to highlight. Will Koger is actually who I kind of project to be that Friday guy. He started a game for him last year, only threw 24 innings, but I think he has tremendous stuff with 25 strikeouts. I'm really excited to see kind of how he takes that next step in this kind of bullpen.
Yeah, you've got a lot of experience in that bullpen. These are all guys who threw 20 innings or more last season. Patrick Forbes being the only one that didn't. He only threw 9.1. But we talked about him on the offensive side. He's going to get some innings as the pitcher. He's going to be a true two-way player for them. I don't think he's necessarily going to be a starter, but he's going to get a chance to pitch out of the bullpen. This is really good. A really good team. I can't remember whether it's Evan Webster or Riley Phillips. One of those two guys was a weekend rotation guy 2 years ago, and they've got a lot of experience. They could push for one of the rotation spots. They both had some starting experience last year. Phillips had 4 games started. Webster had 3. I really do like this bullpen. It's easy to overlook Louisville after what happened last season, but do so at your own peril.
Yeah, Patrick Forbes and Tucker Biven, I think, are the two names that you're obviously going to recognize for 5 minutes ago. Kind of how they're used in this pitching staff. And then, Monty, I feel a little bit robbed. Parker Dittmers isn't in the graphic. I mean, that's the name that we almost have to mention.
Oh, is he not?
Oh, there we go. There we go. Getting ahead of myself again.
We just showed you and gushed about how much we like their bullpen, and we didn't even bring in their freshman arms. Look at this. 7 freshman arms. They have a lot to choose from. Obviously, you mentioned him, the crown jewel, Parker Detmers. Name sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, Monty, go ahead and segment it into your brothers since you left
Yeah,
talking about it so
there we
much.
go. Yeah, that was perfect that we talked about earlier. Parker Detmers is the younger brother of Angels pitcher Reed Detmers, former Louisville great, and so he is very high recruit of the 7 freshmen. This is the guy that's going to get the most opportunity at first. He's the most ready. Absolute stud.
Yeah, I know that was kind of the thing that all Louisville fans were holding their breath on around draft time was his name. I know his name was kind of he had a chance to sign, and that was one of the big conversations was does he go to Louisville? Does he go to the MLB draft? But again, he's right-handed. He's got a power big league curveball from what I've heard from scouts. He's somebody that I think scouts are really, really looking forward to and seeing how much he pitches. And again, I know that we're kind of giving it to the last name, but he has some power stuff.
Oh yeah, I am excited about him. I started to put him on the other graphic because I expect him to be a key pulldown arm ahead of the other freshmen. But with so many freshmen in this group, I thought it'd be weird to say that he's a projected key bullpen arm and then not include him under the potential key freshman arms. So I kept him in there. An intriguing arm for me from the freshman outside of Parker Detmers is Mitchell Dean. He's 6'7" and 230 pounds. So you're expecting a lot of a big power pitcher. His fastball's in the high 80s, and I expect that to change by the time we see him in the spring, if we do see him in the spring, because I think a college strength program is going to figure out how to get his arm strength. When you're 6'7" and 230, it's hard to throw less than 90 miles an hour. I expect to see a big jump in his velocity from what we saw in high school because that is a big boy.
Kyle Crow's kind of another name that I'll highlight. 6'4", feels like a college arm when you see pictures of him. His fastball is going to be around that 92, 93 mark. I think he's another guy that, is from Michigan as he kind of gets into a college program playing baseball every day. I think you could see him add some velocity as well and be another name that, 2-3 years down the road is a key piece in this bullpen. And then Braxton Stewart, the lefty, I think he's another name that you really need to watch. But again, they have, I think, one of the best lefty staffs in terms of freshmen. They brought in a ton of freshman lefties.
I mean, just looking at this graphic, you've got a projected rotation that's solid, right? You've got your 1-2 punch we talked about, and then a D2 starter who put up absurd stats, right? So you're pretty much locked in 1, 2, 3 there. And then we've got 14 guys who can put in quality innings from the bullpen. And it almost doesn't matter who they have offensively when you can put together these numbers. And even if you have to rely a lot on these freshmen, you could have a situation where it's like last year at Duke where they had to rely on a lot of freshmen. And now look at the dividends that's paying for the Blue Devils as all those guys as sophomores have a boatload of experience and have Duke as a top 20 team.
It almost kind of feels like a perfect roster foundation as you kind of age out some of these bats. These stud freshmen can kind of come in and have a little bit of a cushion. And I think that this is going to pay a very, very big dividends for Louisville. And I think as we kind of transition into their schedule, I think that this Louisville team is a team that I kind of see return to the tournament. They have a ton of pieces.
Yeah, I have them again. You did rankings. I did a tier system because it's so hard to separate certain teams, I think, and I have them in the third tier of that. Those dark horses to contend in the ACC. If everything goes right, Louisville could be up there, and we'll get into this a little bit later. I don't want to show my hand too early before we get to our wrap up. Yeah, so a little teaser on what Louisville could do. But talking about that schedule, I am excited about this schedule. The ACC slate. I love that they have the rivalry games midweek. I love seeing that. As a Virginia guy, Virginia Tech's in conference, so your main rival is not somebody you get to see. I love the I love the midweek rivalry matchup there with Kentucky and Louisville. They also go to Vanderbilt midweek. Love that. Indiana. These are not easy midweek games.
No, and just kind of a highlight on that first weekend tournament. They play Indiana State tournament team, South Florida. They went to the tournament a few years ago, and then UConn, who's a team that's always kind of in the mix in the Big East. So that's really kind of one of those underrated tournaments where if you don't follow college baseball close, you kind of might ignore it. But again, I think that's a very underrated slate. And then Xavier in a midweek is another team that kind of looks to take a step forward. I think that there's a lot to like about this. And they end at Notre Dame. I think that's one of the more favorable draws, getting to play Notre Dame late in the season like that. They play Boston College May 3rd to May 5th. And I think that that's kind of going to be in the territory when they do the Pete Freights Classic. So they could be going up and playing at Fenway. I think that there's a lot to like about this Louisville schedule. It feels like a very, very winnable one, but also it's not so easy that it kills your RPI.
I'm laughing a little bit because every time they haven't announced the Pete Freights Classic yet, so every time we've done a schedule and there's anyone going to Boston in April or May, you're like, it could be.
It's always late April, early May.
Yeah, so but it's just a classic Jake making sure he plugs that in there.
I love Pete Freights. It's one of my favorite events in college baseball.
Yeah, it's a great one. Tough schedule in the ACC. Going to Wake Forest March 21st to 23rd. You're going to Boston College, but I mean, at the same time, you're getting NC State at home, Virginia at home, Clemson at home. Those are important home series.
Yeah, the road trip to Miami, I think, is going to be a good test for them too, as well as it's kind of sandwiched between Clemson and UVA, kind of two teams that they have a ton of history with. But again, I think that this is just a gauntlet of a schedule in the ACC, which is, I think, a great thing to see, if I'm being honest with you. I love looking up and seeing all these Louisville games that I'm just excited to watch.
Well, and it's interesting, we didn't even mention this. Their first midweek game is against a tournament team. I believe Xavier is building a pretty nice program, and that's not an easy test first midweek out of the gate.
Yeah, they played in a really competitive in their regional with Oregon last year as well, and Vandy. I think that they were the final two teams standing there at the end, if my memory serves me correct. So again, I think that they're another team that kind of looks to take a step forward, and it's going to be exciting in Louisville, Kentucky, which is something that we didn't see kind of in May of last season. I think that there's a lot to like about this team and a lot to like about the schedule.
All right, as we wrap up with Louisville, what is your floor? What is your ceiling for the Louisville Cardinals?
Floor, I think, is they're a 3 seed in the ACC tournament, and they're outside looking in terms of the NCAA tournament. And I think the ceiling of this team is, I think they could host. If everything kind of goes right with them, I think that they have the talent to be a host. So definitely a completely skewed thing of where they can go. I think they can miss the tournament or be a host.
Did you just say that their floor was they could be the 3 seed in the ACC tournament, but be on the outside looking in? So they'd finish second in the Atlantic Division.
No. Hold on. Time out. They would be one of the 3 seeds in a pool of the ACC.
Oh, okay.
So one of the last teams into the ACC tournament.
That's where I was like, they'd be the 3rd best ACC team, but somehow on the outside looking in.
No. They'd be like in the 12 range.
No offense, 10, 11, but I would have just been like, well, classic Jake, the jester of college baseball hot takes. Notice I don't say the king.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Hey, say what you will, but I called Boston College last year. That was kind of a feather in my cap. Yeah. I was one of the first ones to call them.
Yeah, but what about this Louisville team?
They're going to need a lot of guys to take big steps forward.
I agree with you. I think their floor, I don't think they're going to be as bad as last year, even at their floor. I think they're a bubble team at their floor. I think they're going to be in the tournament. And again, if everything goes right, they could be a host. So I'm kind of with you on that. It's a very strong team that I think is being overlooked. and people are going to find out real quick.
Yeah, and I used kind of the gif of Al Davis of the just win baby with Arkansas a ton last year. Louisville almost just had the loss where they're like, just lose, baby. They were in a lot of these games close. They never got the big hit. They had guys on. And I think the ball kind of falls their way a little bit more this season, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun season for Louisville. I think there's a lot to like. So that's our wrap on Louisville. We're going to move on to Clemson. Lot to talk about with this Clemson team. This is the defending ACC tournament champions. Talking about them, they went 44-19 last year. They went 20-10 in the ACC. They were the ACC tournament champions. They hosted the Clemson Regional, where they lost a heartbreaker to Tennessee, and then were promptly eliminated by number 3 seed Charlotte. Like we talked about with Louisville after their Wake Forest series, April 16th, they went 5-15 down the stretch. Clemson was swept by Wake Forest and was 2-7 on April 1st. They were 16-13 overall following that series sweep to Wake Forest. From that point on, they went 27-4 to capture the ACC tournament. They swept North Carolina State, North Carolina, Louisville, and Virginia Tech. Absolutely incredible job by the first-year coach from Michigan, Eric Bakich. Absolutely love him. He's a great coach, and he's got a lot to replace this year, but there's also a lot to love about this team.
Yeah, remember that series where UCF came and beat them and they all went and partied on the football field?
Oh,
and
yeah.
It ended up being kind of the low point for Clemson and the high point of UCF, of two teams that went in completely different directions. And I remember very, very early on giving a lot of South Carolina fans crap for them losing to Clemson and that being considered a bad loss. And then they go on this crazy run where they go 27-4. And it reminded me a ton of Ole Miss when they were rolling through that tournament, where they might not have had the talent or as some of these other teams that they played, but they just really, really meshed together. And again, when they're getting sweeps in the ACC, that's one of the toughest things in all of college baseball. Is a lot of these teams are so similar. But again, like you mentioned, they are replacing a ton. Caden Grice has moved on to the majors. Billy Amick has moved out west for greener pastures. Cooper Ingles, another name that they're going to have to replace. Riley Bertram, Benjamin Blackwell, Jackson Lindsay. I mean, this is a ton of guys to replace off a team that overperformed last year.
Yeah, I think they were a year ahead of schedule, but that's all gravy, right? Because arriving a year ahead of schedule just gives you an extra year to compete and gives your team a lot of experience with winning. And I really, really like what Bakich did. And it was funny because I remember back in the mid-2000s and when Tommy Bowden was the head football coach at Clemson and his dad, Bobby Bowden, was at Florida State. They would call the Clemson-Florida State game a rivalry, and it just made me think of that when they played last year, because it was two first-year head coaches in Bakich and Link Jarrett going head-to-head, and we were like, it's an interesting series because these two teams are a year away from really being competitive. We were wrong. Clemson was ready, and it was the start of that run. But Caden Grice is a big, big loss because of the two-way capability. He finally put it all together in all facets of the game. Absolutely monster season. And then Billy Amick came out of nowhere after being a part-time player for the first month. He was kind of the catalyst for that run, right? He hit 413, 17 doubles, 2 triples, 13 home runs, 63 RBIs. He goes to Tennessee. And Cooper Ingle, Riley Bertram, Benjamin Blackwell, all great position players, all moved on. They played 62 games or more. And the strength of this team now is going to move to that pitching staff we'll talk about a little bit later. But first, let's get into the lineup here. You're chomping at the bit. I can see it over there.
I know. I'm excited.
So we love to see it. So we should have it up there. There we go. All right. So we'll start at the catching position as usual. So they lose Cooper Ingle, who played a lot of the catching position last year. He also played some right field to let Jacob Jarrell get in there and some game time. But they Eric Bakich, he brought in Riley Burcham, the second baseman last year from Michigan, who was their team captain basically from the get-go, arriving on campus, despite being with the team just 1 year. He adds Jimmy Overtop from Michigan, a big-time get, a former player of his. Not great numbers last year, but he suffered through injuries, only played 19 games. But you have to remember in 2021, in 2021 he hit 11 home runs. In 2022 he hit 15 home runs. So this is a guy who's got a lot of pop. I expect him to be the everyday catcher, with Jacob Jarrell getting a lot of time in the DH role and at first base.
Yeah, they really do kind of have the luxury of having Gerald DH when they bring in Jimmy Obertop. The numbers really aren't that good, but again, he does kind of provide a veteran backstop behind the plate. Bakich is, I think, another guy where you can kind of trust him to run his staff. And again, those stats, which granted, take them with a grain of salt. It is from a D2 conference in the Big Ten. But I think that there is a lot to like about him being a very, very veteran bat behind the place. Sorry about that. It is Obertop.
Obertop, yep.
Yep.
The graphic is incorrect and it's bothering me because I know it's incorrect. But in my defense, the V is right next to the B, and I can't help but notice that you have now downgraded the Big Ten from a mid-major to a Division II thing. So you've bypassed the state of South Carolina. You're trying to get the entire Midwest to make you public enemy number one.
One more name before we kind of move on is Hideki Prather behind the plate. I think that he has a chance to kind of grow into this role as well. Very, very underrated kid. I couldn't really find a lot about him, but I think that he's another player kind of worth highlighting as Clemson kind of moves into the future.
Yeah, you didn't. I love that you didn't respond to.
I move on. I don't get caught up in beef.
In beef. All right. Now Jimmy Obertop and Jacob Jarrell, both those guys can play first base as well. I expect to see Jarrell there more often than Obertop because he's going to be behind the plate. But this is interesting. Again, I did notice that they're going to be going a little bit younger. Like I said, you could have in theory gone with Obertop or Jarrell at first base, the other one at catcher, but it looks like based on what we saw in the fall that Cooper Blouser is going to be the guy at first place. He can play second base. He played first base and second in their fall game against Coastal. He's going to get the shot, redshirt freshman over there at first base. Blake Wright, the veteran third baseman, he's going to move to second, I believe, to make way for Nolan Naraki, another redshirt freshman. So you've got two freshmen, albeit with a year of redshirt experience on the corner infield.
Yeah, I think up the middle, Jacob Hinderleiter is the name that I'm most excited to see about. He was my ACC Newcomer of the Year pick, transferring over from Davidson. I think that there's a lot to like with his swing. It's a very, very fluid one from the right side of the plate. And then again, he has tremendous range up the middle as well. But he's kind of the player that I have circled, highlighted outside of, Cam Kennerell in center. I think he's kind of the second bat to be kind of that good 1-2 punch.
And it's interesting to note that Blake Wright might be making that move to second base because the belief was that a big reason Billy Amick left is that he wasn't going to be able to play third base at Clemson. And yet on the graphic here, you can see that it looks like Blake Wright could be making that move to second base. And that would have opened up the door for Billy Amick at third base. So you have to wonder if that wasn't maybe true, that particular issue of why he transferred to Tennessee. So Blake Wright, he's obviously the veteran in this lineup, but you got to like the shortstop depth there because you've got Hinderleiter and then you've got Quafo from Georgetown who has some good numbers. He missed all of 2013, but when he did play in 2022, he hit 9 home runs, stole 11 bases, hit 297. He can play second or third base. So you've got some veteran depth there to go with a lot of these freshmen because, as you can see, Tristan McClatty and Jaron Purifoy, both freshmen.
Yeah, another thing to kind of note is outside of Tristan McClatty, these are all right-handed hitters. So I think that that's another thing to kind of watch is these are all big right-handed bats. So you really don't have to worry about any of these guys platooning. I think that the guys that win this job are going to be there all season.
Yeah, and McClatty's going to be important, probably as a pinch hitter, being that lefty bat. He's got a smooth swing. I really like what he brings. That number 55 throws me off a little bit it's a high number, but
I forget, Devin Williams from Texas wore 55 when they were going to the College World Series at third base. So maybe it's a good luck thing for third baseman to wear 55.
Maybe.
So nice you do it twice, Monty.
There you go. But yeah, it's a young infield, outside of young corner infield, young depth. But then you've got the two veterans in Hinder Leiter and Blake Wright up the middle.
All right, go ahead and throw it up. The best part of Clemson's team.
I don't know if this is the best part of Clemson's team, but best part of their offense for sure.
Yep, Will Taylor in left field, hit 362, was a wide receiver on the football team. That's another kind of common theme that we found ourselves saying it's had in these previews. First year focused on baseball. I mean, Cam Cannarella needs no introduction. 388 last year, lefty bat, I think is going to be a huge piece of this Clemson Clemson outfield. And then Alden Mathis, kind of the veteran in right, hit 296 last year from Richmond. I think that this is probably going to be the strength of this lineup is Will Taylor and Cam Cannarella. They're going to go as far as these two bats kind of take them.
Yeah, I honestly wouldn't be surprised to see all three of these guys in Taylor, Cannarella, and Mathis be their three big hitters in the middle of their order, whether that's 2, 3, 4, or 3, 4, 5, depending on the preference of Bakich on how he wants to do that lineup, because the philosophy on baseball has changed a little bit from the traditional middle of the order. But I would not be surprised to see these three outfielders out there. Cam Cannarella, an absolute stud, played for Team USA, looked so good when I saw him there. He's just gotten better and better and better. And when we talk about making that freshman, we talk about the sophomore slump a lot, but there's a lot of guys who make a huge jump from the freshman to sophomore seasons that it should be talked about a lot more. Like the sophomore surge or something like that. I think you're highlighting sophomores that could have breakout years. Now, Cam Cannarella is not going to have a breakout year because he's already broken out, right? But he could have a sophomore surge, right? And take his abilities to the next level. Again, 388, up there with the ACC's best. He's the reigning ACC freshman of the year. Only hit 7 home runs. That's where I think we might see the surge. He reminds me he reminds me a lot of what Vance Honeycutt did as a freshman at North Carolina. Although Vance Honeycutt, I believe, hit 25 home runs or something ridiculous as well. He had a 25 season, but similar situation where he has a breakout freshman year, is looked at as the number one prospect for the following draft. I expect Cam Cannarella to maintain his height, because I know Vance had a little bit of a slump, but Will Taylor. I was listening to a podcast today, ACC, etc., which is a D1 product. They interviewed Bakich in the last couple of weeks, and he was talking about how team-oriented Will Taylor was. You got to remember, when you give up that football scholarship, he loses that scholarship, because baseball only has 11.7 scholarships to spread out. And so Will Taylor is not on scholarship now because he dropped the football team, but I expect big numbers from him. Obviously the average was great. I'm going to see that. He could be an ACC player of the year dark horse candidate, especially if he's getting protection from Cam Cannarella, or if he's protecting Cam Cannarella, because Cam Cannarella's on base, you're going to be a little bit nervous. So obviously that outfield, a lot to like. And then, you've got depth behind him.
Yeah, they almost feel like they play the game in very, very similar ways. All had over 40 RBIs, all had double-digit steals. And like you mentioned, I think that these are going to be the 3, 4, 5 guys. Do we kind of see that quote-unquote sophomore slump from Cam Cannarella? I think that there's a lot of people who have him as kind of an ACC player of the year favorite, and I think it is very warranted. And I really don't see him having a Vance Honeycutt type year like he had last year. I think that he is kind of the catalyst in this new Clemson team. And I think he can honestly be even better. I mean, we saw him at Team USA. He had a lot better approaches at the plate in the summer, which I know is granted limited sample size, but it's almost weird to say because he was the SEC freshman of the year, but I think he's gotten a lot better at the plate.
Yeah. And just to be clear, Vance Honeycutt, had a great season despite it being considered a sophomore slump. If that's a sophomore slump, I'd take that for like almost any player. But he did have a dip, so you're hoping Cam can avoid that. But you like the fact that he gets exposed to some other coaches as well. That can always help because they can see things that maybe Eric Bakich didn't and help him with his approach. Also, getting to be around the best college players in the country. That Team USA collegiate team was absolutely stacked. I loved seeing all those guys together on the same team. It was really fun. And Cam Canarella probably learned a lot from his teammates there.
Just to kind of highlight a few of the other names, Leighton Lackey and Devin Parks, I think are two names to kind of really watch out for. I don't think that they'll play a ton really anywhere, and I think that they'll really kind of not struggle to get at bats, but Clemson has the luxury to have three of the best outfielders in the ACC. And then Jack Crichton, I think, is another name that you kind of need to watch out for. Really, really struggled last season. How do they kind of use him as he really is kind of put on the back burner?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think you're going to see it much in the outfield, maybe with Alden Mathis, but I don't think so. I would imagine it's probably his job to lose. But you could see Crichton and Hall platooning. They did a lot of platooning last year, and those are – we talked again about that. I'm coining it now, the sophomore surge. Both Crichton and Hall, they got a lot of experience last year. Yeah, they hit under 250, but a lot of experience. Crichton played 34 games. Hall played 39, albeit limited at bats. But those are two guys that got a lot of experience as freshmen. Now they know what they're getting into as sophomores, and that could make a big difference. They could be pushing for playing time or that DH role.
Monty, I got kind of a question for you here before we jump into these pitchers. Who do you think has the better outfield, Louisville or Clemson, as they have two very similar outfields?
Clemson.
Short and to the point.
The star power. I mean, I think Louisville's got a great outfield, but it's a solid veteran outfield. This is a star-studded. You've got two potential first-round picks here. If Will Taylor has a great season, he can push to a first-round draft pick. So it's a little bit different because you've got Isaac Humphrey and JT Benson on Louisville, who are great players, but they're not going to be first-round picks, right? Eddie King, I don't see him necessarily as a first-round pick, though. If he has a monster year, that's somebody who could all of a sudden be in a conversation that was nowhere near it. So the star power that Clemson has in this outfield with those two guys is just on another level.
Unrivaled, I think. Unrivaled.
Yeah, good word.
All right, just to kind of move on into the pitching staff, Monty, this is going to be, I think, the biggest question mark for this Louisville team. I mean, not Louisville. Sorry, this Clemson team. Sorry,
I don't think this is a question mark at all. I think this is their strength. Much like we've talked about with other teams like Virginia Tech and Boston College, and teams like that where we're not sure how their pitching is going to be, but they're going to hit. Well, it's kind of the opposite here with Clemson. They only lost two big arms from last season. That was Jackson Lindley and Ryan Ammons. They bring back a ton of experience. The question mark isn't necessarily whether it's the strength of their team, it's who's going to be in what role. and I'm bringing in they've got 6 potential guys who could start. Austin Gordon is a guy who I think has ACC Pitcher of the Year upside. He also pitched for Team USA, by the way. Tristan Smith is a guy that comes from the bullpen. But he has a lot of experience, is ready to take that next step. Those are two guys who were underclassmen last year. Now you've got a sophomore and junior, and then they bring in a Matthew Marshall from Wofford, who started 19 games for Wofford, for a very good Wofford team that didn't quite make the tournament, but 93 strikeouts and 92.1 innings as your Sunday starter. I actually have him projected as Sunday starter. Meanwhile, Ethan Darden was their Friday night guy at points last year. He might not even be breaking this rotation because of how good the rotation is. Then you got Billy Barlow, who missed a lot of time last year injured, but he was a weekend starter 2 years ago as a freshman.
Yeah, Tristan Smith is kind of the one name that I'll highlight as he kind of has truly electric stuff, 43 strikeouts and 31 innings. But again, I think he's kind of a streaky walker, and Clemson kind of does have that luxury of, if he starts to walk people really early, that they can kind of plug and play some of these names in as well. And I like how you touched on Billy Barlow. I think he's another name, not very many innings, but again, when he pitched, he looked electric.
Yeah, and I think they've got a lot to choose from the starting, but again, I just love what they're bringing back. A lot of experience from last season, and as we get into the bullpen again, look at how many guys they can really depend on here. That's a lot of arms they bring in. Number one, they brought a lot of guys back, but then they went and got these two guys from Wofford. We already touched on Matthew Marshall, but Lucas Malstead, who he's a reliever. He didn't start a single game last year, but he threw 83.2 innings. He had a 2.69 ERA in those 83.2 innings. So he's your swingman role. You got to love that for Clemson.
Rocco Reed's kind of another name that I think we'll see kind of in that setup man role. His ERA kind of will probably scare a lot of people away, but when he pitches, he's about mid-90s with that sinker and can really kind of induce a few double play balls. I think he's another name to watch out for. And then Rob Hughes, that ERA, the flip side of that, I think is just so low. Does that kind of translate to a whole season only through 17 innings? But those are the two guys that I'm really highlighting for this Clemson bullpen.
Yeah, and I'm so sorry. Again, this is about the fourth time I'm apologizing for the graphic. It's not Rob Hughes, although he could be huge for Clemson. It's Rob Hughes. I think D1 actually, Aaron Fitt actually projects him to be the closer for this team. Again, 1.56 ERA and 17 and a third inning. That's electric stuff. Only 12 games though, but you're bringing back guys who saw a lot of action last year in Nick Clayton and Rocco Reed and Reed Garris, Ty Olenchuk, who can play both ways. He had a couple at bats last year. Casey Talent and Joe Allen, who we have under the other potential starters, but didn't really touch on him as much of it. I think he's an outside option as a starter. It's probably between those five guys at the top of the list, but Joe Allen's a really important bullpen piece as well. And BJ Bailey.
Just to kind of highlight those three freshmen too at the bottom, Jackson Cole, Drew Titsworth, and then Justin, I think it's Legurnick. I think that those are three names to kind of watch in the future, as they'll kind of probably get a lot of those midweek pitching outings. And I think that those are three kind of tremendous names that I think are the future of Clemson.
Yeah, and against East Carolina, you got to love what Legurnick did. He was sitting low 90s and has a really good breaking ball. Of the three freshmen, he's a guy I really, really like, especially from the left side.
All right, Monty, I think this is a great transition into the Clemson schedule. Obviously, opening up with Xavier, we already went on our rant about them, but I think the one that you really, really need to highlight is that February 27th, March 1st, March 2nd, March 3rd. That's the big one with South Carolina. I think that's the one where we'll really kind of see how this Clemson team kind of stacks up against, I think, one of the better SEC teams.
Oh, you think they're one of the better SEC teams?
I wanted to be nice.
Well, and right after that, they got a midweek with Kansas State. Right? That is a tough opening schedule. Xavier, Kennesaw State's not an easy small conference game, but then you've got that, South Carolina, home, away, neutral site situation, and then Kansas State. It is a really tough start to the schedule, and they're going to benefit, I think, from that, regardless of how well they do. It's going to give them a lot of experience.
Worth noting, too, they also draw Notre Dame and Pitt, so kind of the two bottom feeders of the ACC. But again, they also play Wake and Miami and some of the upper brass. So I think that this is, a very winnable schedule again with Clemson. And I'm really excited to see Clemson Wake. I think that's probably the series of the year in the ACC. I know that Monty's probably going to say it's something involving Virginia, but that's the one I'm probably the most excited for is Clemson Wake.
Well, I also just need to defend the bottom feeders. They might finish at the bottom of the ACC, but they're tough games.
Mm-hmm.
Grittsburg, all right? Don't disrespect Grittsburg, my friend, because the moment you disrespect them, you're going to go in there and lose a series. It's you can't count them as wins before you get there. It's a tough conference to play in, even if they're not a great team. So, another midweek that's interesting. They got Georgia. Coastal. I really like their non-conference schedule.
Charlotte's another kind of up and coming team that
Yeah.
has the power to kind of run in and sneak up on some teams in midweeks.
Yeah, so there's a lot to like. They avoid Virginia, which is nice for them. So it's going to be a fun schedule for Clemson. I really like they weren't afraid to schedule people, and I think it's going to benefit them that there are no easy games for them.
In the season with Boston College, I think that those are going to be two teams that have a lot to play for down the stretch too, as well. As Clemson, we'll kind of transition here. Monty, what's the ceiling? What's the floor of Clemson?
Why do I have to go first? Because you went first for Louisville, huh?
Yeah.
Thank you for also. I just looked at the comments. Thank you to Javon864. We've been mispronouncing Bakich wrong, or sometimes wrong, sometimes right. And it is Obertop. As we discovered, I had put the graphic and decided to put the V. But I think the ceiling for Clemson is Omaha, right? If everything goes right, you can see Clemson go beyond where they did last year. And they were a team that you thought could go all the way, even with the way that they were on that streak where it didn't seem like they could lose. On the other hand, I think their floor, I think they're gonna make the NCAA tournament. I think if things go wrong, they end up as a 2 seed. I think they're just so good with that pitching staff, and I think that the star power in the outfield and Bakich is so good of a coach that Clemson is absolutely looking great for 2024.
I hate Monty. That was literally exactly what I was going to say. Pretty much.
Maybe you should have gone first then. All right.
I think Omaha is the ceiling of this team. I think they could even win a few games in Omaha, the way that their staff and star power kind of line up. And then again, I think that their floor is a 2 seed. I look up and down this lineup, and especially in this bullpen, and I really struggle to see how this team misses the tournament. I think that it's okay if so and so doesn't do as good, if Cam Kittarella takes a step back. I think that they still have enough guys around him that I do kind of see the floor as a 2 seed that in the NCAA tournament. So I'm really excited to see this Clemson team. I might need to order some Clemson merch. Jump on the bandwagon now.
Wow, there we go. So our poll said that you were going to be South Carolina public enemy number 1. It doesn't seem like that's going to be it. South Carolina, the University of South Carolina, that is going to be alone in hating you unless for some reason Clemson just doesn't want your love.
Well, Monty, hold on a second. Let me get these on.
Uh-oh.
All right, I'm already ready to go. Ready to go.
It's like the Lee Corso headgear. You've got some
the
sort
gloves.
of memorabilia. Yeah, you didn't put on your Louisville helmet earlier, so
that's only for special occasions. That's only for Louisville home runs.
Is the preview show not enough of a special occasion? All right, so that's going to wrap up our Louisville and Clemson deep dive for this week. Next week, we are headed to the Sunshine State. We've got Miami. We've got Florida State. Those are the 2 teams before we head to North Carolina to finish up our ACC deep dive previews ahead of the season. It'll be next Wednesday at 8/7 Central. Jake, what do you got? Closing thoughts?
These are 2 of the teams I think I'm most excited to see in the ACC. I think that I know I say that every week, and I'll probably say it next week when we have Florida State. But Clemson and Louisville, I think, are 2 teams that went in complete opposite directions last year. Do we see one kind of return to the mean? Which one is it going to be? And then on another note, tomorrow on CBC Texas, we're breaking down the Texas Longhorns, the namesake of CBC Texas. So be sure to tune into that as we kind of do a similar thing with the Texas Longhorns tomorrow.
And as always, we'll have the weekend rotation on Saturday. I believe I won't be there. Jake will be. It's going to be there's going to be some fun stuff. I think they're highlighting series to watch and doing a draft of some sort, right?
Yes, we're doing a Golden Spikes draft. We're each picking 3 series as well, and we got one more thing.
Yeah, AJ
Omaha
said,
8.
yeah,
Omaha 8.
AJ said I wasn't allowed to come for some reason. I guess he's calling the shots now, so I won't be there. They've got enough there. They've got enough star power with Jake, Alex, AJ, Mark, and Noah. So it'll be a great show Saturday morning. We're gearing up towards the season. Lots of content. You can see our past previews. You can see Jake's past Texas previews. Lots to love. Anyway, we'll see you next week on Wednesday to preview Florida State and Miami.
See y'all then.